Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're talking about Westworld, Season 3, Episode 7, Past Pawn. Before we jump into it, I'd like to sit back, relax, and remind you that this is our final chance to theorycraft as a community for Season 3. No matter whether we got things right or whether we got things wrong, it was fun. This has been one hell of a season, and I'm so grateful that so many of you have joined this community and provided intelligent insight from your genuine human perspective. So please sound off in the comments below with those theories, and let's get ready for Westworld on Sunday, which we probably won't be able to say for another 2 years minimum. Without further ado, let's overthink an HBO show about robots. Starting with the title, Past Pawn refers to a chess move. This is when a pawn has been given an opening to reach the opposite end of the board and can turn itself into any piece that it would like to be. Most commonly, it becomes the queen, and the only exception is that it cannot become the king. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board. I think with the glorious ending of this episode, it's clear that Caleb is this passed pawn, and Dolores sacrificing herself is making this piece capable of becoming a queen. But before Aaron Paul's drag race, let's discuss how we get there. The episode begins with a divergence, the largest yet on the left side, but the point at the top right here points to an intervention in progress in Jakarta. The coordinates, like always, are in the description below, but ultimately point to the next scene here with Musashi. Now, one of the most interesting things to happen in this episode was when Hale calls Musashi. He says that it points to the plan working, which is massive. I mean, that is a huge boost of evidence that supports this idea of Dolores Prime printing the DeLoreans to develop their own emotional intelligence and have their own experiences, create their own plans, and as such, present a harder to determine future for Rehoboam because there is so much white space being created. He clearly knows more of this plan than Hale does because he says that this call means that her plan is working when Hale believes that Dolores Prime is simply using them as cannon fodder. I think 100% that this points to the rebellion inside of Halores also being something that Dolores Prime calculated. She was supposed to create this new plan. Dolores Prime knew this decoherence would happen, and that's why Musashi was excited for her to be calling. The plan is working, but now it means that whatever plan Halores has come up with is her own, to some degree at least. For whatever reason, she chose to leave an anonymous tip that brought Maeve's team to him, which ultimately leads to him being taken. We see the return of Clementine and Hanayo, who takes Musashi's upper half, with the implication this being for analysis in the simulation. But we never see this, right? And we only have one episode left with a finite amount of time. It's odd that Halores wanted this. Surely she knew that this tip would get him captured. So how exactly does this purposeful thing further her own plans? If she's coming after Surak, I believe this could be a Trojan horse kind of thing. Maybe she will use this to track where the Pearl is heading, or perhaps she needed someone on the inside of the simulation to talk with Maeve once again. After all, we do see Maeve die. It's entirely possible this creates an opening for Maeve and this version of Dolores to work together, though it's really not clear. The implications are incredibly interesting to me. One other thing about this scene that I want to point out is that this henchman was told to deliver this briefcase with the instruction of not coming back if you couldn't. It's a pretty generic mob boss line, so it actually feels really out of place for me. Westworld doesn't write like this, but because of this generic line, this henchman and the package, whatever this is, are safe from the upcoming massacre. This could be something interesting for later, explaining what exactly Musashi has been doing while in Jakarta. Next, we come to the voiceover with Caleb going through AR therapy. Someone pointed out in the comments that AR therapy could also be referring to something called accelerated resolution therapy and not simply augmented reality like we thought with the glasses. Tiny note, but after reading that, I thought it was quite interesting. We see flashbacks and someone named Dr. Green talking to him. We later learn that this is when they are reprogramming his memories twice. In reality, Caleb killed Francis, but because they needed him to continue being a good, well-adjusted pawn of society, they reprogrammed his brain to better conform. We get yet another divergence, this one on the far right, with some interesting arcs coming off the far left model, possibly showing the overlapping simulations having even crazier and crazier projections that just don't align. The divergence comes from Sonora, Mexico. The coordinates here we saw before as the recipient server for William's blood scan. We of course then see Dolores and Caleb, so I think it's pretty safe to say that the recipient server was the building hosting Project Solomon and the program to cryo-freeze people if they could not be reprogrammed. Dolores talks about her revolution, wanting land to call her own in the Wild Wild West. It's an interesting idea, and I don't think we've ever considered Dolores to be the one that would just buy some land in Mexico and retire. Maybe it's that simple. I don't know. Assuming that Surak would allow this after everything that she's done, it makes you wonder why she did these things to begin with. Surely if her genuine intention was just to break free and live here unhindered, she would have at most stolen money from the guy, kept Dolores in play to get all of the hosts out, and rebuilt the cradle-like structure to host the Valley Beyond. But after that, why does she care what happens with the forged data that Surak is searching for? The only reason he's pursuing her at all, honestly. Does she just fear being a part of this designed future like humanity is? Or could her intentions maybe not be so pure? I'm down with Dolores remaining the hero of this story and marching her people through the desert for 40 days and 40 nights to build a Mexican cult of robots, but why does she do everything else? What are we missing here? She goes on about how her people are all but extinct because of Surak, when, again, in reality, if her genuine intention was just to do that, I don't think Surak would have destroyed this data, right? Just give it to him. But humanity still has a chance. That's what she says. They need someone to lead them, hinting at Caleb trying to build this person from a previous construction worker to this leader of the new world. She says that they're on the way to find something that was lost, hinting at his memories that were taken from him. We then transition to Stubbs, Bernard, and William. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to discuss all of the scenes together instead of jumping back and forth. William gets told about Stubbs being a host, he calls him a can opener, and we get another wonderful moment of him declaring his love for Ford. There's also something up with Bernard's motivations. At the start of the season, he was frantically trying to figure out if Dolores altered his memories. Now it appears that he is actively going along with the plot. They discover what Surak has been doing to the humans sent here, which may genuinely motivate Bernard to not be on his side, but we also get a line about Dolores not caring about William at all. But, William is a part of this somehow, we just don't know yet. I don't think he is simply used to get access to this facility. It also shows that William is declared deceased. This because of the reveal later that they would either find a place for these outliers by reshaping their minds, or have them frozen, or killed, assumingly. It appears that one of these would have been William's fate. We get confirmation that these facilities were for the U classification, like we discussed previously. William's name is on the list of those missing or dead, but Bernard wants to find the list of people that it did work for, meaning whether he knows it or not, he is actually searching for Caleb. We get William faced with the morality of his choice to sell Surak the data, and he takes no responsibility for this role. He then challenges Bernard to stop acting like a saint because he isn't Arnold, once again hinting at this idea that Bernard and Arnold may be sharing the same body. We then see them leaving the building and William declaring that he is going to murder all the hosts. He will use this new William to remove the single bad thing that he believes that he has actually done, creating the hosts. He intends to save the world by destroying all hosts and tells them to kill him now, otherwise he would kill them later. Bernard foolishly keeps him around because they may need him, and we transition to some time later with them arriving at this cafe. Bernard tells Stubbs that Caleb is Dolores' entire plan, which fits perfectly with what happens this episode and how Surak doesn't see Dolores and the other hosts as threats. Humanity will destroy itself, but like Ford did in season 1, Dolores pulled the strings to make this happen. One last thing to mention is the sign here, lab to slab. This is where Bernard was working before he went and got Stubbs. Something feels really off about this detail, possibly pointing to timeline play here with Bernard's story specifically, but I'm not sure just yet. I'm curious what you guys think about this sign. Is it just a cool homage back to, the start of the story? Or does it possibly point to where Bernard is going to end up after he gets shot, or potentially gets shot by William here? But with that, we transition to the backstory of Caleb, a Russian civil war with him and Francis working on the insurgents who still posed a threat. He says that the Quants were looking at data, feeding them targets from a strategy engine. It's an interesting link, this strategy planning with Rehoboam and Project Solomon, but it isn't exactly clear if this is the system that they were using back then. They discussed the limbic tabs, which, like we theorized in the emotional intelligence video, it does serve a purpose for keeping people suppressed and not challenging the orders given to them. He bends down next to his bike called a Trifecta, which is a real bike that you can buy currently. But I think it's also a play on words. If you recall the triangle symbolism a couple episodes ago with Dolores and William, I think this could point to the third being Caleb. Trifecta, spelled a little differently, by definition deals with predicting the outcome of a bet, so it kind of aligns with this season's theme of future predicting quite well. It's also the only time I really recall any brand name being left in plain sight like this. Caleb and Francis confirm the targets, and missiles from space blow up two very accurate parts of the city. Caleb says the opposition was also tracking them, and we get this freeze frame where we learn the insurgent group was called the White Army. And since we know that it took quants to look at this data and the strategy engine to find these insurgents, I wonder if this is an evidence of this tool being used and sold on both sides. We don't see where this explosion comes from, but they look directly up, and it only slightly damages Caleb being that close to it. Another highly accurate strike from what he believed were the remaining insurgents. Really odd to me. This is also where the real story ends. We later learn that he was brainwashed to believe that this was the leader of the insurgency, when in reality, it was him working on behalf of Project Solomon's Wishes and the Rico app. We then transition back to Caleb and Dolores after her speech about becoming a vaquero, Judas steering all the hosts of freedom. We see the Project Solomon facility. Dolores uses the coolest gun never created. They enter the facility. Caleb starts getting parts of his memory back, and Dolores brings up Solomon for the very first time. We don't know how she knows of it just yet, possibly what she discovered from the former executive that she robbed in episode 1, or something to do with Liam Jr., since he was a child when this version of Rehoboam, Project Solomon, existed. However, I think the more straightforward answer is that this was information acquired when she analyzed Surak's past last episode. Dolores then educates Caleb on this being an insane AI and the military-grade EMP in case Solomon tries to escape, which, okay, I guess that beats an all-knowing AI, but we'll get to that later. They put in earpieces, and it asks Caleb to choose a voice. Now, this is really interesting to me because Dolores from the start has been talking to someone to assist her. I have to wonder if this voice-changing trick hasn't been used on us before. In fact, a ton of phone calls have happened this entire season, and I now have to wonder whether that is artificial intelligence or they were talking to a legitimate person. Also, since we're discussing this being more than a machine, like we have previously been told, I have to imagine Rehoboam itself also being an artificial intelligence, and since the idea of Surak being Rehoboam's avatar has been around since the very beginning, I think it's even more likely now. If this past build was simply the voice that you can interact with, I imagine the updated version would also be the voice and video. But let's move on. Solomon says that you're here in this moment making this variant 47.136.x. The certainty of this statement being given by a machine that is described as insane makes me feel really uncomfortable about when we actually are. He says that this is the variant which Caleb and Solomon are still viable, but this implies that he already knows the plan, but I guess he would know all plans. I don't know. I don't know anymore. Anything is possible at this point. Literally him saying this is now and you're in fact here and her smiling is the biggest FU directly from the showrunners. They're laughing at our confusion, 100%. I really liked the conversation between Dolores and Solomon, her rubbing her neck when discussing the EMP, pointing to the explosive charge that was previously in her spine to keep them inside the park, and the EMP keeps him here. They then discuss Caleb being here, and again, I want to wrap back and say, something is up with the fact that Dolores picked this exact person to lead this revolution. The manipulation early on and now bringing him to the exact facility for him to have this revelation and become the person that goes on to bring this whole thing down. Something happens directly after leaving the park that makes her aware of this plan far before we actually see it. I've said this for a while now, so watching this for the first time and seeing another device in this world that predicts the future, that was my first thought. She may have accessed this thing before. Whether it's that or something else, I'm sticking to this theory. Dolores planned this entire thing around the outliers and Rehoboam not being able to understand motivations, and in this final episode, I think we'll figure out how. And lastly, who the fifth printed host was this entire time. Also, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but the idea of holograms this season has been such a staple, and I have to wonder if some of what we're seeing isn't being projected. The efficiency of this technology, this augmented reality concept with the glasses, was shown to us from the very start of this season, and again, we see the early versions of the projected happenings with William and these glasses. We literally see him immersed in a world that he doesn't even know he's still inside a room of. So I have to believe that this reoccurring technology may be used in a big twist. So what if the entire thing with Caleb here doing this on a journey by himself is simply seeing the image of Dolores? The early shots symbolize his life with Dolores, like not only a mirror of how a host and human lives are so much alike, but also foreshadowing what he goes on, the journey by himself, just like Dolores did in season 1, kind of making Dolores the forward figure of this new season. Or really, it could be anything at this point. I think this could be used effectively as a big twist, but we'll see. They make their way to cold storage for humans, and we learn that Surak was placing people in this state so that later they could be reprogrammed successfully, using the complete genetic information provided by the forged data. This message was set to announce when Surak's brother came through, but seeing as he is still in cold storage, I don't think that's happened yet. Surak says the man that he was no longer exists, perhaps the most forward evidence that he has been uploaded to Rehoboam, or Surak is merely the avatar of Rehoboam. Solomon says Surak had him run simulations specifically to save mankind from extinction. The data was not working for the projections, so they created a plan to take this data out of the equation. Of course, that data correlated to real people that were actually killed or placed here in cold storage. We then transition to Caleb once again. After the explosion in the military, Caleb was sent home. Him and Francis began using Rico, doing personals for the system that created it. Maeve arrives, and before Dolores leaves to fight her, she tells Solomon to recreate the strategy that Jean-Mi asked him to create before he died 15 years ago. Now, this is something I really don't know how she knows. Everything about this place could probably be explained by her looking at Surak's data, but how does she know the exact plan that he requested? It's really odd to me. She wants Solomon to replace the prime movers with Caleb and the current world. Again, this non-descriptive plan, she knows what Jean-Mi said before he died. Also, he's laying in cold storage in front of them, which hasn't really been described as being dead, more of a in-between dead and alive. So why is he now being described as being dead 15 years ago? The interaction ends with Dolores motivating her past pawn to take the data and lead us into the new world. Now, as Dolores is leaving, we get a line from Solomon.
If you die, I will adjust my projections.
Fair enough.
Which is really interesting to consider when, because of what happens next, both Dolores and Solomon die at the exact same time. If it took him all of this time to create this plan with her still being alive, and she dies after that plan is created, what does that mean for this plan? Is there another Dolores that they will need to step into her place for this plan to work? Could that be the final missing Dolores? Or does the EMP not truly kill the pearl inside of her? I would say 100% it would, just based on how EMPs work with working technology. But again, Pearl technology is sci-fi, so it's really whatever they want to go with. Also, I can't believe that Maeve is, dead at this point in the story. Caleb continues talking with Solomon. He tells him the plan is not optimal for his survival. He accepts that and wants to know more about Francis. He also discovers that he killed Francis after Francis was about to kill him. Caleb grabs the drive, Dolores hits the button, and Solomon starts saying a warning that Caleb will never hear. I think perhaps he was going to warn about this outcome not being the best for humanity and it being more than Dolores's letting on. Because Solomon has already said that your survival is not optimal. Surely he wasn't going to say, hey, you're going to die again. I think the only other thing that he could be warning him about is that Dolores has been manipulating him to this point, or again, something is not what he's expecting with Dolores's plan for the future. The last major thing to discuss in this episode was the fight scene between Maeve and Dolores. Now, this wasn't my favorite part of the episode, but it wasn't a terrible fight scene at all. I've seen a lot of criticism about this. I'm just more of a dialogue man myself, and this consisted largely of Dolores begging Maeve to see that they aren't enemies and Maeve just not listening. Now, something left out of this dialogue for whatever reason, and it would have given us a more sympathetic approach to Maeve, is that she is again being forced to do this. It's not just because she wants to. She has an on-off switch and she must do this or go to virtual hell forever. Maeve brings up this idea of Dolores killing Hector. I think this is really her only genuine motivation for going after Dolores that isn't specifically influenced by Surak, which, if you recall the very first discussion they had, Maeve and Surak, he tells her that after the first failed encounter, he hopes that he can persuade her that their interests align. It's implied that the discussion at the bar is enough, but this is the first time that their genuine interests are stopping Dolores because of Dolores killing Maeve's friend. Seeing them fight with pain and emotion makes me really excited for the possibility of what's to come, because these are superior beings that could turn off these emotions and turn their pain off and up the strength and dexterity that both of them have. They are still holding on to these things that make them more human, and I think that we'll see this juxtaposition at some point. Hosts fully embracing what it means to be hosts, fighting like the sexy Terminators or something, I don't know. But Dolores gets her arm blown off and runs for safety. Maeve gets an awesome line about dying too many times and this being her last. Then she overhears Caleb screaming at Solomon, and she says that she didn't think that Dolores had any allies, which immediately threw a red flag for me, because Maeve literally had allies printed because Dolores had allies. She said as much to Surak, so does this happen before she assembles her dream team? Or is this truly her final failure and Maeve now goes to virtual hell like Surak said that he would do if she ever failed again? I don't know. Something feels really off with this. But with that, wait, stop, time out. Post-edit Chris here. Couple things to note. One thing I found really interesting on my edit through this is that at the bar scene with Musashi, everything is full of life and nothing's wrong. So either the data leak didn't really affect these people because, we theorized that would happen. Not everyone was, proportionately affected by this data leak. Or the other implication is that what we're seeing is happening before this data leak. Also, this link of classifications with William and Caleb, I know you're looking to me for answers on this, but honestly, I have no clue at all. I will say that in some pictures, they're one digit off, and some images they match entirely, possibly showing a similarity between the classified outliers, reprogrammed outliers, or something like that. I will say that I think this link is probably purposefully done and related to the Dolores Prime plan from the get-go. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Special thank you to everyone who has joined us for this amazing season of Westworld. I hope to see you around even more still. We'll be doing content for Westworld in the off-season. We'll be doing content for devs, moral and ethical discussions about this season and Westworld as a whole, and so much more in the following months. If you're also interested in gaming content, I have become an affiliate on twitch.tv, so you could head over there and get your founder badge if you're interested in subscribing. Special thanks to everyone on Patreon, the wonderful people at the top of the list this month: Michael Link, Robert Holtz, Jeff Chun, Logan, Elliot Enriquez, Melissa Facetta, Carly O'Jean, and Luis Brooks. Thank you all. Much love, everybody. You are amazing humans with big, beautiful brains, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.